Halloween is a night of innocent childhood adventure.
Halloween's a pretty big deal.
Children everywhere going door to door up and down their streets. It's a fun holiday for kids.
It's a time for make-believe ghosts and goblins, a night when quiet suburban homes become haunted houses. Although there was nothing frightening about 61-year-old Barbara Garcia and her husband, Phil.
Mrs. Garcia seemed like somebody's grandmother. Mr. Garcia looked the same, somebody's grandfather.
But then, a gruesome discovery deep in the woods.
He had bloody injuries to his face and his head.
Left the whole town wondering, was this sweet older couple everything they appeared to be?
The Garcias looked like an all-American family.
Or did their modest suburban home mask a monstrous secret?
Barbara Garcia had her own house of horrors.
It's Halloween 2003 in the sleepy little town of Hobart, Indiana.
Hobart is a small town, about 30,000, maybe 35,000 people, just outside Chicago.
Kind of a small town atmosphere, cute little downtown on a lake, middle class, working neighborhoods.
It's the sort of town where every October 31st, ghosts, goblins, superheroes, and zombies go door to door in the gathering dusk.
Halloween was always a big time. The kids could run the street freely. So Halloween was big.
Well, happy Halloween!
And as she does every year, 61-year-old Barbara Garcia passes out candy to the children who ring her doorbell. Barbara and her 71-year-old husband, Cipriano Phil Garcia, are the quintessential Midwestern couple.
Mr. Garcia was a Korean War veteran. He worked for many years and retired from Ford Motor Company.
His wife was a licensed practical nurse. They had 3 adult sons and 1 adult daughter.
They are the kind of neighbors that the younger families on the block appreciate having around.
The Garcias looked like an all-American family.
But that evening, Barbara's husband is nowhere to be seen. And the kids crowding the couple's front porch have no clue that the gray-haired and grandmotherly woman passing out the candy is also hiding a gruesome secret. Barbara Thompson had lived in a small Indiana town all her life.
Barbara was from Hobart. She grew up in Hobart.
She was a shy, unassuming child.
And Barb was, kind of quiet. She really was.
But in 1960, while she was still a teenager, Barbara got the local gossips talking.
About a year after Barbara graduated from high school, she was pregnant.
Barbara broke things off with the baby's father, but she didn't stay a single mother for long. Following the birth of her daughter Tammy in 1961, she met Cipriano Garcia. Phil, to his friends, Cipriano was 10 years older than Barbara and a Korean War veteran.
He went into service when he was 17.
He was wounded. He received the Purple Heart.
And he'd spent time as a prisoner of war.
We knew he was a POW. But he never cried about it. He never boasted about it. He never bragged about it. He was a war hero.
After the war, Phil returned home, took a factory job, and tried to put the horrific experience behind him.
He was a die setter at Ford. That's one of your higher class of jobs there. He made good money.
A few years later, he met Barbara at a mutual friend's wedding. And after a brief courtship, they married.
They married when her daughter Tammy was just 9 months old. Phil then adopted Tammy as his own and raised her as his child.
He always spoiled her. He always took care of her.
Together, Barbara and Phil had 3 more children.
There's 4 of us. I got 1 brother, 1 stepsister, and 1 young sister.
And despite having 4 kids at home, Barbara made the time to go back to school and get a nursing certification.
Barbara was a licensed practical nurse.
Seemed like as long as I can remember, she was a nurse.
And by Halloween of 2003, The kids were grown, and both Barbara and Phil were retired. The kind of older, quiet couple who always made sure to pass out candy to the neighborhood kids on Halloween.
Mrs. Garcia seemed like somebody's grandmother. Mr. Garcia looked the same, somebody's grandfather.
Although that Halloween, as their children went up to the Garcia's front door, neighbors noticed that the grandfatherly Phil was nowhere to be seen. 3 days later, November 3rd, 2003, a man walks through the woods in southern Cook County, Illinois, just over the Indiana state line.
A gentleman who was walking the pond looking for cans of copper.
But as he nears the shore of a small pond, the scavenger chances upon something else.
Saw this blue plastic tarp laying on the side of the pond, bound up with orange extension cord.
And when the scavenger opens the tarp, he makes a horrifying discovery.
There is a body out here.
He had bloody injuries to his face and his head.
Upon finding the dead body, the man runs for help.
He found another fellow fishing nearby, and together they managed to contact the Cook County Sheriff's Department.
And once the detectives arrive, all they know is that the body is that of an older male.
He is dressed in pajama bottoms, a white t-shirt. He had no kind of identification on his body.
And in addition to the bloody injuries to his face, the fact that the body had been rolled up inside an area rug before being bound in the plastic tarp suggests that the dead man is the victim of homicide.
And obviously somebody's trying to conceal something.
The electrical cords that he was wrapped in were tied to cinder blocks.
2 cinder blocks that appeared to have some red spray paint on them.
And then there is the location of the body.
It's all forest preserve, and the pond itself is forest preserve pond.
In fact, based on the body's location and the cinder blocks, the investigators surmise that whoever had dumped the body had pulled off the road above the pond and attempted to roll the body down the embankment and into the water.
The embankment is kind of wooded. There's some trees, some shrubs, and obviously it didn't make it all the way down.
How the victim died wasn't so readily apparent, however.
There was no obvious signs of entry wounds of bullets, stab wounds, no literature marks.
Oh, we saw some road rash on his forehead from when they were most likely dragging him.
When he performs an autopsy on the body, the medical examiner finds no evidence of fatal injuries either. So with the cause of death still a mystery, he orders a complete toxicology analysis.
Those generally take some time to complete.
However, in the meantime, there is one thing that the autopsy is able to determine: the dead man's identity.
When the medical examiner's doing the post, we get to fingerprint him. We sent it to the state lab, and obviously you had to put a rush on it because we try to identify an individual. At that point, it came back that he was on file as a veteran.
And the name on the VA file was Cipriano Phil Garcia. Coming up, the investigators make a suspicious find at Barbara's house.
Underneath her coffee table, there was a cleaned area, the same size and shape of the area rug we found Mr. Garcia in.
And the clues point to a surprising suspect.
She was being kicked out of her home and had come back to live with her mother.
On November 5th, 2003, it was 5 days after Halloween and less than 48 hours since a passerby had found 71-year-old Phil Garcia's dead body, dumped in the woods south of Chicago.
Once we're able to identify who he is, we can run him through another database, find out his last known address, which we did, which was in Hobart, Indiana.
Which is what brought investigators from the Cook County, Illinois Sheriff's Department to 61-year-old Barbara Garcia's door.
We just wanted to make notification that we had found her husband deceased.
But when they knocked, there was no answer. So the investigators decided to take a look around.
Their house wasn't very big. It was like a cinder block type house on the corner, but just your average middle-class neighborhood out there in Indiana.
Although as they walked around the house, something in the backyard immediately caught their eye.
There was a stack of cinder blocks along the back fence in the yard, and they were perfectly stacked, and you could see that 2 cinder blocks had been removed.
The cinder blocks had red markings on them. That's the same as the cinder blocks that we found in the area of the deceased body.
And that wasn't all.
In the backyard, there was a picnic table, and on top of the picnic table was a package of tarps, blue tarps.
According to the labeling on the package, it had originally contained 2 tarps.
One of the tarps was actually missing.
And the remaining tarp and blocks matched the ones at the crime scene perfectly.
We're confident the cinder blocks came from there and the tarp is from there, but at this point, we still have no idea what took place at that residence.
But could they get some answers?
At that point, things started to become suspicious to us. That's when Mrs. Garcia drove up from the store.
As Barbara got out of the car, there was nothing about her that suggested she was capable of dumping her husband's body in the woods, much less that she could have killed him. And when the detectives asked to speak to her, of course, the typical grandmother invited them inside.
At the house, they looked like the normal family. You have family pictures, him, his sons, Tammy, dogs. You know, it just seemed like your typical American middle-class family.
Although once again, among those typically middle-class surroundings, a few things stood out.
When I sat down with her on the couch, you can notice that underneath her coffee table, there was a clean area, as if there was something laying there prior to the coffee table being put back. It was a perfect rectangular square, possibly the same size and shape of the area rug we found Mr. Garcia in.
Was it simply a coincidence? Or was the missing rug the same one?
My partner saw a picture sitting on top of the TV stand that had the area rug in it that we had found Mr. Garcia wrapped in.
Increasingly suspicious, the investigators wondered if they'd come to tell Barbara something she already knew.
Detective Ortiz went on to inform her that Mr. Garcia is no longer with us.
But the news appeared to surprise Barbara.
At first, she was just kind of, I would say, flabbergasted.
However, before the investigators could follow up with additional questions, Barbara's 42-year-old daughter Tammy arrived at the house.
Tammy asked what was going on, and Barbara said that Dad was dead.
And compared to her mother's reaction, the investigators found Tammy's response to the news curious.
There was no reaction. She sat down. I remember that she did sit down.
Asked when she'd last seen her husband, Barbara said it was October 30th, the day before Halloween.
She stated that they had gotten into an argument.
And according to Barbara, the argument had been over Tammy.
She was being kicked out of her home and had come back to live with her mother and Cipriano.
She didn't pay her taxes on her house over there in Hobart there.
But a month after Tammy moved back into her old bedroom, Phil thought his adopted daughter had overstayed her welcome.
He wanted her out of the house.
Although according to Barbara, it was Phil who left.
She said that he got dressed and left, and she knows he left because she seen him walk past the front of the house.
Was Barbara telling the truth? Her story about Phil getting dressed before storming out of the house didn't fit with what the investigators already knew.
He couldn't have left in clothes because he was found in pajama pants and a t-shirt like he was going to sleep.
But despite the inconsistencies in Barbara's story, the investigators hesitated to think that the sweet and elderly woman who'd kindly invited them in could possibly have something to do with her husband's death.
Miss Garcia was a pretty fragile, not the type of person that you would think would commit a homicide.
And neither was Barbara's daughter, Tammy.
I would never, looking at them, expect either one of them to be involved in something like this at all.
Still, between the rug and the cinder blocks and the fact that Barbara's story didn't match what the investigators already knew, they suspected that Barbara and her daughter may have known more about Phil's death than they were letting on.
At that point, yes, we thought there was some suspicious activity going on here at the house, or maybe he was where he was killed.
And Tammy may have had a motive for getting rid of Phil.
He was going to kick her out, and she would have no means to live.
Was it possible that Barbara was lying to protect Tammy? That she had something to do with her adoptive father's death? The investigators were determined to find the answer.
We did ask if they would mind coming back to our police department to continue our talk.
And the investigators talked to them separately to see if their stories added up.
We placed Barbara Garcia into what we call our roll call room, and we placed Tammy in a different room.
Alone with the detectives, Barbara didn't appear nervous about answering their questions.
She did say something about she watches a lot of police shows, so she knows how everything is going to work, and, didn't seem to really have a worry in the world.
But did that mean she was innocent? The investigators opened their questioning by pointing out the inconsistencies in her story about Phil storming out of the house.
We come back at her with little pieces of things that we know could not be true because her whole story doesn't match any of the evidence. He was not found in clothing, he was found in pajamas.
That wasn't all the investigators revealed either.
We kind of started to give her more information, saying the area rug was here and it's not here. So we just started to tell her what we had now to see what would happen.
And what happened was that the more the detectives told Barbara, the more her story started to change.
It went from they had an argument, he left, to he was pretty physical. So she threw a snow globe at him, which hit him in the chest.
Barbara said that Phil, stunned by the snow globe, had sat down on the couch and that she had taken the opportunity to flee.
Her story was that they had argued and she went in her room.
According to Barbara, she'd waited in her bedroom for several minutes, giving her husband a chance to calm down. And when she had finally emerged, she made a startling discovery.
She said he was laying on the couch, and I checked him, and then he was dead.
According to Barbara, the sudden realization that Phil was dead had sent her into a panic and left her in a desperate situation.
If the police or the paramedics come, he would be officially declared deceased, and the checks would stop coming, and she couldn't have that.
Her and Tammy needed his retirement check and Social Security to survive.
So, scared of losing her home and her primary source of income, Barbara said that rather than call 911, she had decided to conceal her husband's death.
She did say she pulled him onto the area rug, rolled him up.
And according to Barbara, that's when her daughter came home.
According to Barbara, Tammy wanted to call the police.
But Barbara said she couldn't allow that.
She convinced Tammy that they needed to get rid of his body to continue receiving his checks.
And according to Barbara, Tammy had reluctantly agreed to help.
She said that her and Tammy threw him off the couch onto the floor, wrapped him in the area rug, and then drug him out to the garage.
But when they tried to get Phil's body into the back of his pickup truck, mother and daughter had run into a problem.
Mr. Garcia weighed about 220 pounds.
But try as they might, Barbara said they couldn't lift Phil's body into the pickup.
So they left him in the garage, covered him with a tarp.
And according to Barbara, he was still there the next night, Halloween.
Barbara knows he's in the garage. He's out there dead. And she's at her front door greeting these small children. Happy Halloween, trick or treat, here's some candy. Just like there was nothing that had happened.
And the children crowding around had no clue what evil the little old lady handing out candy was really capable of. Coming up, is Barbara telling the investigators everything?
I said, well, we'll get a full toxicology report.
Or will the horrible truth finally come out?
I had to do something.
On November 6th, 2003, during questioning by detectives from the Cook County, Illinois Sheriff's Department, 61-year-old Barbara Garcia admitted that she and her daughter, 42-year-old Tammy Garcia, had dumped her husband Phil's dead body in the woods just over the state line from the couple's home in Hobart, Indiana.
Barbara said that they needed to be able to keep Phil's pension and Social Security checks coming in, and they could only do that if they didn't call the police.
According to Barbara, 71-year-old Cipriano Garcia, Phil to his family and friends, had died on the evening of October 30th.
She said, we had an argument, and I hit him with a snow globe, and he was laying on the couch, and then I don't know what happened, and I checked him, and he was dead.
Barbara told investigators she suspected that, agitated by the fight, her 71-year-old husband had suffered a heart attack.
He was found to have some heart problems. He was overweight, certainly a a natural death would not have been totally shocking.
What Barbara and Tammy had done over the next several days was shocking, however.
Barbara Garcia calmly went about her life, making her weekly hair appointment.
Her daily activities did not change just because Mr. Garcia was laying dead in the garage.
And since the following day was Halloween,
Barbara Garcia calmly went about handing out candy to the neighborhood children who came trick-or-treating.
The families who came to the door trick-or-treating that night accepted the candy and said thank you and went on next door. They had no idea that in the garage right there, Barbara Garcia had her own house of horrors.
eventually Barbara and Tammy had managed to move Phil.
They knew they had to do something because the body was going to start to smell.
So, according to Barbara, she'd driven Phil's body to the forest preserve just over the state line.
They went to an area she was familiar with because she used to pick her husband up from the Ford plant in Fort Heights, Illinois, where he worked. So she knew the pond was there.
Everything Barbara told the investigators fit with what they already knew. But did that mean it was the truth?
I told her, I said, well, we'll get a full toxicology report from the medical examiner's office, so they're going to be able to tell us exactly how Mr. Garcia died.
The mere mention of the toxicology report prompted an immediate reaction from Barbara.
That's when her story changed again.
And once Barbara started telling her new story, the detectives decided to bring in the prosecutors and get it on tape. In her statement, Barbara admitted that she hadn't told the investigators the whole truth, that there was more to the story of Phil's death.
About 7 years ago, I had a gambling problem.
And according to Barbara, she'd regularly fed her addiction at the riverboat casinos moored in nearby Lake Michigan.
She was always at the boats and always gambling.
And as Barbara admitted, she was almost always losing.
I had gone through a large amount of money.
Approximately how much money did you spend or go through?
Approximately $70,000.
She'd gambled away a substantial portion of their savings without telling her husband, and she had remortgaged their home again without his knowledge.
Phil had eventually found out about Barbara's deception, however.
When he found out, he was very angry.
And in response, Barbara had done something desperate.
A few years ago, I had tried to commit suicide. Could not succeed with that. And I didn't know what else to do because my daughter and I had no place to go.
She was committed to a mental facility for some time.
I spent a week at Charter.
In the wake of the suicide attempt, Barbara and Phil had tried to put their lives back together.
He apparently forgave her, took her back, and allowed her to remain on their joint checking accounts.
However, Barbara said that Phil never really trusted her again.
He was always calling me a liar. Every time I went somewhere with my daughter, he would jump all over us when we came home.
According to Barbara, the fights with Phil had become more and more frequent over the last several years.
Every time I did something that was wrong, he was verbally abusive. He would go on rampages.
And Barbara told the investigators that Phil's rampages weren't just screaming and shouting.
Barbara Garcia claimed that he was physically abusive to her.
Including, she claimed, the rampage on the night of his death, October 30th.
I started for the bathroom. He thought I was going to go get ready to go somewhere. So he got up, came at me, told me I wasn't going anywhere, swung at me, scratched my nose with his ring.
Okay.
Swung again, scratched my arm with his ring. I think that's what he scratched. Shoved me against the side of the doorway with my right shoulder. I fell to the floor.
Okay.
And got up and went into the bedroom and closed and locked the door.
And while she was cowering in the bedroom, listening to her husband rage outside the locked door, Barbara realized that worse was coming.
Cipriano was going to go to the bank the next day to withdraw some money.
I had been helping out my daughter financially, and the bank account was $4,000 short.
Okay, and Phil did not know about that?
No.
And if he did find out about the missing money, Barbara said the consequences would be dire.
I had to do something because I knew if he went and found the money gone, he had already threatened my daughter and I to throw us out.
So you knew that you had to do something.
Right, because I had no place to go.
To Barbara, it was either she went or Phil did.
She decided that she would kill him.
And the retired nurse knew how to do it, too.
She offered him a cup of coffee, and she spiked it with sedatives.
I put in 10 Klonopin and 5 Artane.
And what type of pills are those?
They're muscle relaxers.
Okay. And did you say you put them into the microwave?
Yes.
That was his routine. He'd have the last cup of coffee before they cleaned the pot, and she put enough in there to where it would knock him out.
What did you do after the microwave was finished?
I took it in and told him, here's your coffee.
However, according to Barbara, the muscle relaxants hadn't killed her husband. They'd merely knocked him out.
I waited a while till he was snoring good. And then I got a vial of insulin.
She admitted to using the insulin. It was Tammy's insulin because Tammy was diabetic.
How many total shots did you give him?
I believe 10, but I don't know. The others were in the same area, but I don't remember exactly.
You don't remember?
It was in the same area.
Okay. After, having given him 15 sleeping pills and 10 injections of insulin, and being a nurse, did you know what that would do to him?
Yes.
Okay, and what did you think that it was going to do to him?
I figured it would kill him.
The insulin overdose simply served to cause him to stop breathing.
And after a little while, Phil did stop.
You determined that he had no pulse at that point?
No.
Okay. After you determined that he had no pulse, what did you do?
I sat for a while. I didn't know. I was scared.
However, the retired nurse did know one thing. She couldn't call 911 and try to pass off her husband's death as natural causes.
I knew if I took him to the hospital that they would know. They would do an autopsy to know what I'd done.
So Barbara said she had decided to get rid of Phil's body, and she had convinced her daughter Tammy to help.
She wanted to call the hospital, call 911. I told her no, we couldn't do that. She started to cry. She said, we needed to go. I told her we couldn't. I said, I can't afford to do without his money that he's got coming in. I needed that to live on. I told her she had to help me. She again argued with me. She didn't want to help. She wanted to call somebody. But I would not let her do it. Tammy's very loyal to me.
And eventually, after passing out candy on Halloween, they had managed to move the body.
They completely wrapped him in the tarp as well as the area rug. They attached a orange extension cord to him and threw it over the bed of the truck and over the hood of the truck and attached it to Tammy's car.
She moved the car back slowly, and I maneuvered the board and him, and we managed to get him up into the truck.
And then Barbara had driven her husband's body to a pond over the state line.
Her only thought was to get rid of that body, and she didn't give any more thought to the scene that she had left at her own home.
Although that might not have mattered if it weren't for Barbara's next mistake, failing to sink Phil's body in the pond as she'd intended.
When you saw that he had landed at the edge of the water but was not in the water, what was going through your head?
Well, I figured I needed to go down the hill and get him into the water. But it had started raining, and the edge was slick, and I was afraid of falling.
Okay, so what did you do?
I just got in the truck and left.
She treated his body, the father of her, or 3 of her children, her husband of 40-some years, like trash, throwing it by the roadside.
Coming up, Barbara's trial takes a surprising turn.
The prosecution had to explain why no needle marks were found.
And will the answer lead to an acquittal?
Her husband had died of natural causes.
By November 10th, 2003, it had been a week since Barbara Garcia's husband, 71-year-old Cipriano Garcia, had been found dead in Cook County, Illinois.
On November 3rd of 2003, a fellow collecting cans by the roadside saw part of the body protruding from under a blue tarp alongside a pond.
And it had been more than 72 hours since Barbara had confessed to killing her husband and dumping his body.
I wish now that I hadn't done it. I'm sorry I did it. I did love him very dearly. We did have over 40 years of marriage together and 4 kids. A lot of problems, but we'd always been able to work them out. But recently we were just always fighting, always arguing, and it was just the final. I had to do something.
It wasn't until the 10th that police in the couple's hometown of Hobart, Indiana, finally placed the 61-year-old mother of 4 under arrest.
Since it happened in her town, it would be prosecuted in Hobart, in Lake County, Indiana, where it actually occurred.
News of the arrest stunned the community.
Barbara Garcia was not your typical defendant. She looked like a nun without a habit or a librarian.
No one was more surprised than Barbara's family.
Shock. You know what I mean? You're in shock for a few days after something like that.
The shocks kept on coming, too. First, the toxicology results from the autopsy appeared to confirm Barbara's story.
Cipriano Garcia was found to have between 20 and 400 times the amount of insulin in his body that he should have. He was also found to have sedatives in his body.
And then, a week after Barbara's arrest, her daughter Tammy was also charged for her role in the crime.
She was charged with improperly moving a dead body.
She wasn't charged as an accessory to murder, though.
I do not know if she was there when it actually happened. I do know she was involved with all the other parts as far as removing the body and everything.
But would the uncertainty about Tammy's role in the murder become a factor at her mother's trial? It was September 26, 2005, almost 2 years after her husband's death, that Barbara Garcia went on trial for his murder.
Barbara doesn't have that many homicides, and certainly this kind of homicide where an innocent victim, a family man, a member of the community was killed in such a really atrocious way.
And that wasn't the only thing that set the case apart.
You have a 60-something-year-old woman who's accused of murder and insulin her husband to death. It's not a common thing you hear about every day on the news.
Although in its open, the prosecution urged the jury not to be deceived by Barbara's grandmotherly appearance.
Barbara Garcia was really, when you get down to it, just a stone-cold killer.
One motivated by greed.
She had gambled away $70,000 of the family's life savings, had remortgaged the house without her husband's knowledge.
And according to the prosecutors, when Barbara feared that Phil was about to discover her deception, the murder plot began.
It was no longer going to be to her benefit to have him alive.
Although she'd hoped to conceal her husband's death in order to keep cashing in on his pension and Social Security.
She had already gambled away all of their life savings, and she was going to need his Social Security and what was left of his pension in order to survive.
None of that was speculation on the prosecution's part either. They had Barbara on tape, admitting to all of it.
I'm sorry I did it. I loved my husband, but it had got to be too much.
Barbara Garcia confessed to drugging her husband with sedatives and a cup of coffee, and then injecting him multiple times with insulin.
You injected him with approximately 10 insulin shots, is that correct?
Yes.
Okay. And then after you felt his pulse and you confirmed that he was dead, that you then drove his body to a lake in an attempt to hide it, is that correct?
Yes.
The toxicology findings cemented very clearly that Barbara Garcia's confession to the police that she had repeatedly injected her husband with insulin after sedating him was in fact exactly what happened.
Or was it possible that someone else had made the injection? When it was the defense's turn and Barbara took the stand to testify, she dropped a bombshell.
Barbara Garcia recanted her confession.
She claimed that she had simply found him dead and that, yes, she did move the body, only in order to keep his Social Security and pension checks. She had no explanation, however, for the amount of insulin and sedatives found in his body at autopsy.
Although when asked why she had falsely confessed to killing her husband, did her answer hint at the true explanation?
I don't want my daughter to get in any trouble for this.
My mom took the rap for Tammy. That's what I think.
After all, she had as much of a motive for getting rid of her stepfather as Barbara did.
When he tried to put Tammy out, that's when everything went nuts.
My daughter has no place to go.
And Tammy did have plenty of experience injecting insulin.
Tammy Garcia was a brittle diabetic.
Was it possible that after shielding her daughter, Barbara would suddenly turn on Tammy in an attempt to save herself?
Barbara Garcia maintained that her husband had died of natural causes.
So how did her husband end up with a lethal dose of insulin in his system? As the defense was quick to point out, the autopsy couldn't say.
At autopsy, there was no evidence found of the injection sites.
Coupled with Barbara's recanted confession, the revelation put the prosecutors in a serious bind.
The prosecution had to explain to the jury why no needle marks were found.
And when it came time for closing arguments on October 3rd, the prosecutors did their best to provide an answer.
The Cook County coroner's autopsy results showed an extraordinarily high level of insulin in his body, an amount that could not have been naturally produced by his body.
But if that was the case, why were there no visible needle marks? The prosecutors pointed to several possibilities. The first was to remind the jurors that Phil had been dead 4 days when his body was found and had been exposed to the elements for almost 48 hours.
It could have been due to the state of decomposition.
The prosecution also suggested that Barbara had carefully made the injections so as not to leave any telltale signs.
She was a nurse. She knew what to do to kill him.
And finally, the prosecutor personally demonstrated to the jury that it was possible to make an injection without leaving a mark.
The prosecutor went over to them with a needle and stabbed himself in the arm. He said, "Now, can you see? Does anybody see where that hole was?" And of course, they couldn't because it is a very fine needle.
But would the dramatic display be enough to erase reasonable doubt? Coming up, the jury struggles to reach a consensus.
At least one or more of them was considering Barbara's story.
And all of them wondered, was such a sweet little old lady really capable of cold-blooded murder?
As far as I know, it was a natural death.
On October 4th, the jury in Barbara Garcia's murder trial retired to consider a verdict. The 63-year-old mother of 4 was accused of killing her husband, 71-year-old Phil Garcia, on the day before Halloween in 2003.
On Halloween 2003, As Mr. Garcia lay dead in the garage, Barbara Garcia was handing out trick-or-treats to neighborhood kids as if nothing had happened.
And then, after passing out candy, Barbara had dumped Phil's body in the woods with the help of her daughter, Tammy.
I think it's very cruel and dishonorable and not the way to treat anyone you lived with for 42 years.
And at her age, if convicted, Barbara faced what would amount to a life sentence.
At the time of Barbara Garcia's trial, the penalty for murder in Indiana was 45 to 65 years.
But while Barbara had made, and later recanted, a confession, would the prosecutors be able to secure a guilty verdict?
The defense attorney did a very excellent job trying to poke holes in his client's confession, noting that she had been there a long time, she was an elderly woman, she was frightened.
And the longer the jury deliberated, the more the prosecutors started to worry.
It indicates at least one or more of them was considering Barbara's story that, in fact, she had found Cipriano and only disposed of his body.
Although after a little more than 10 hours of deliberations, the jury finally made its decision.
Barbara Garcia was convicted of murder.
In the end, all of those statements that she made that were presented by the prosecution just made more sense to the jury.
Following her conviction, the judge sentenced Barbara to 55 years in prison. And now, after 14 years behind bars and suffering from Parkinson's, Barbara Garcia has had plenty of time to think about the crime and her conviction. As far as she's concerned, the fact that she recanted her statements didn't matter to the jury.
They had no concern for me. They were only concerned because he was dead and he was a hero.
And according to Barbara, she still has no criminal history, despite the fact that she's in prison for murder.
As far as I know, it was a natural death. He was 71 years old, and I've been incarcerated for 14 years. And I think that's enough time for something I didn't do.
Or did the prosecutors have it right all along? Did Barbara's grandmotherly exterior mask the evil lurking within?
Brutal, vicious, heart-stopping. She reached out her arms and simply said, "Help me."
Dateline Secrets Uncovered, Fridays at 8.
Was profoundly and immediately smitten by Ashley's magnetic presence. Her compelling life story, her vibrant energy, and her unwavering convictions. The feeling, it seemed, was strikingly and powerfully mutual. Ashley, in turn, was deeply attracted to Doug, perhaps not merely by superficial allure, but by something more profound she perceived in his character. She was attracted to his, what she perceived as maturity, an insightful observation that suggests a yearning for stability, for an anchor amidst what might have been a more transient, ephemeral existence as a model and political volunteer. He knew what he wanted. The investigator continued, dissecting the perceived qualities that drew Ashley in, and he had the same priorities as her. This powerful confluence of shared desires, aligned priorities, and a mutual sense of purpose created a potent, almost irresistible force between them, igniting a connection that, to external observers, appeared intensely captivating. It was a mutual obsession, an investigator mused, choosing a term that subtly suggests a connection extending beyond mere infatuation, hinting at an all-consuming intensity that, while initially intoxicating, might, in retrospect, carry undertones of an unhealthy, perhaps even pathologically swift bond. The sheer velocity with which their relationship escalated was nothing short of astonishing, even by the most permissive standards of whirlwind romances. Following their initial encounter at the political rally, A mere meeting that had ignited a fervent spark, a dizzying courtship unfolded, leading to an astonishing decision. They decided to get married just 13 days later in a private ceremony. This breathtaking pace, almost unprecedented in conventional adult relationships, spoke volumes about the intensity of their mutual obsession and, critically, about Doug's own deeply ingrained personal and spiritual beliefs. As a strong practicing Christian, Doug was unequivocally completely set on marrying quickly. For a man of his profound faith, committed to the sanctity of marriage and adherence to spiritual principles, such a rapid union with a woman who demonstrably shared his foundational beliefs might have been perceived not as reckless impulsivity, but rather as a divinely guided, principled imperative rather than mere romantic convenience. However, the lightning speed and, critically, the profound secrecy surrounding their marriage immediately triggered significant concern and, for some, a palpable sense of alarm among Doug's closest relations. Doug doesn't tell anyone in the family about marrying Ashley, a family member later recounted, expressing profound sense of dismay and betrayal at the omission of such a monumental life event. The deliberate exclusion of his immediate family, particularly his cherished daughter, Eva, from such a pivotal decision, represented a stark and uncharacteristic departure from Doug's usual behavior and values. The family member, with a chilling undertone of retrospective dread, added a disquieting postscript to their observation. He knew he had to do it in private and quietly, or we would have stopped him. This statement suggested a deeply troubling awareness on Doug's part that his family, particularly given perceived haste and the potential age disparity, would have perceived this rapid union as profoundly ill-advised, perhaps even dangerously precipitous, and would have unequivocally intervened to protect him from what they viewed as a potentially perilous decision. Their concern was not merely rooted in superficial disapproval of Ashley, but in the suspicious alacrity of the decision itself, an alacrity that felt profoundly uncharacteristic of a usually thoughtful, deliberate, and family-oriented Doug Benefield. After their private and hastily arranged wedding ceremony, Ashley gracefully withdrew from the demanding and transient world of the political campaign trail, redirecting her focus instead to embarking upon a new life chapter as a wife and, soon, a mother, establishing her roots with Doug in the historic city of Charleston. For a time, their new life together seemed to embody the very essence of a public image radiating effortless glamour, social prominence, and unadulterated happiness. They would travel, they would go to functions where they dressed very nice. A keen social observer noted, sketching a portrait of a life that projected affluence, sophistication, and a harmonious partnership. Their presence and carefully curated image even graced the pages of local publications. They were in magazines, a detail that underscored their visibility and perceived success. It was, to outward appearances, a portrait of a charmed and enviable life, a couple seemingly destined for continued social triumphs and marital bliss. Their burgeoning family was further blessed in the year 2018 when Ashley gave birth to a daughter. The arrival of a child, for many couples, invariably solidifies the bonds of marriage, infusing a relationship with profound new purpose, joy, and shared responsibility, seemingly cementing their union even further. Yet, despite the meticulously crafted public facade of a perfect partnership and the blessing of a new child, the intricate tapestry of their relationship began to unravel with alarming speed and irreversible damage. By the year 2020, just 4 short years after their whirlwind secret marriage, the carefully constructed illusion of domestic harmony had shattered irrevocably. It had all fallen apart. The public image of success and unblemished happiness had crumbled under the weight of unseen forces and profound dysfunction, yielding to an undeniable and devastating reality of personal discord. And now, the 27th of September, 2020, had brought an unbearable and lethal culmination. Now, Doug is dead after Ashley shot him in what appears to be a case of domestic violence. The fundamental question, still hanging heavy in the air like a shroud, echoing through the halls of justice and across the stunned community, remain not the undeniable who did it, but the far more intricate, psychologically charged, and morally complex question of why did it happen? What deeply buried resentments, what unspoken fears, what carefully constructed deceptions had conspired to transform a story of rapid romance and public adoration into a horrifying tale of lethal violence? As Ashley remained stunned, silenced, and psychologically disoriented in the back of the patrol car still on the scene, a new and profoundly emotionally charged element of human drama arrived, further complicating an already overwhelmingly traumatic situation. Her mother, completely unaware of the cataclysmic events that had transpired in her absence, returned from a local park, Ashley's young daughter in tow, both blissfully ignorant of the horror that awaited them. She approached the house and started seeing everything that was going on, a detective recounted, describing the mother's dawning, agonizing realization as her eyes registered the surreal tableau of flashing police lights, the ominous presence of multiple patrol cars, and the somber, professionally detached faces of numerous law enforcement officers. Her immediate, heart-wrenching reaction, fueled by a parent's primal and almost instinctual fear for their child's safety, instantly vocalized a drastically different and deeply preemptive version of reality. She believed that Ashley was dead, the detective explained, noting the initial, profound misapprehension of the unfolding tragedy. With a visceral, agonizing cry of profound despair and protective rage, she verbalized her terrifying and immediate assumption. She walks up with a, "Oh my God, my daughter. He killed her. He finally killed her." This deeply emotionally charged declaration, made under conditions of immense stress, shock, and palpable sorrow, immediately introduced a crucial, indeed central, preemptive defense narrative. He had been coming after us for 3.5 years. Ashley's mother exclaimed with fierce conviction, directly and unequivocally implicating Doug not as a victim, but as a relentless, persistent aggressor in the prolonged family saga. For 3.5 years, he had been begging for help, and nobody had helped him. She continued, her voice imbued with a profound sense of frustrated desperation and a perception of profound, institutional failure to protect her daughter and granddaughter from Doug's alleged menace. This spontaneous outburst, while entirely understandable from a distressed and fearful mother, also served a critical, perhaps unintended, purpose. It immediately planted the seeds of an alternate interpretation of events in the minds of the deputies present. It signaled a long-standing history of intense conflict, a pervasive pattern of perceived threats, and strongly suggested that Ashley and her immediate family had been living under the dark, oppressive shadow of persistent fear and alleged harassment. As a seasoned criminal psychology analyst, I immediately recognized the profound implications of such statements, delivered spontaneously and under extreme emotional duress at a crime scene. These are not carefully constructed, legally vetted narratives. Rather, they are often raw, unedited expressions of a deeply held belief, a visceral response to trauma, or a narrative that has been internalized and perhaps even rehearsed in the mind for a significant period. The mother's vehement and immediate statements powerfully indicated that Doug had already been firmly cast in the role of the menacing antagonist within their family's lived experience for a considerable duration prior to the shooting. This immediate and forceful framing, emanating from a highly emotional yet primary witness, would significantly influence how investigators approached the initial interviews, shape their information-gathering processes, and inform their interpretation of subsequent events. The responding police, well-versed in the multifaceted complexities and inherent emotional volatility of domestic disputes, promptly posed probing questions designed to gauge the historical context and potential validity of these immediate grave accusations. Had they been arrested for domestic before? One investigator inquired, seeking documented, objective evidence of prior official interventions or charges against either party. The mother's quick and dismissive response, "He knows how to play the game," was an indirect but potent insinuation, suggesting Doug perceived adeptness at manipulating legal systems or cunningly evading official repercussions for his alleged aggressive behaviors. When pressed directly on precise nature of Doug's alleged aggression, does he ever get physical? The mother retorted with an intensity that communicated the profound depth of her daughter's alleged suffering, focusing on a more insidious form of abuse. It's emotional like you wouldn't believe. This emphasis on psychological and emotional torment, rather than overt, documented physical violence, provided a more nuanced, yet still profoundly alarming, picture of the alleged domestic dynamic, but also left a crucial gap in verifiable physical evidence that could readily corroborate the extent of purported danger. The extraordinarily swift and coordinated arrival of both legal counsel and a therapist on the scene immediately after the initial chaos further signaled the deeply entrenched and highly organized nature of the specific situation, suggesting complexities that transcended a typical domestic incident. Ashley's mother, remarkably, stated that they had already reached out to Ashley's attorneys, a testament to an almost instantaneous activation of legal representation after such a profound, traumatic event. Furthermore, these attorneys had then called a therapist aware of Doug and Ashley's history to the scene for support. The presence of a mental health professional specializing in such fraught domestic situations, coupled with the almost simultaneous appearance of legal counsel, created an environment that was, from a dispassionate investigative standpoint, profoundly unusual and indeed highly orchestrated. The fact that the therapist was on the scene so quickly and that these attorneys appeared certainly made the investigators leery. A veteran detective candidly conceded, the undertone of professional suspicion evident in his voice. This convergence of immediate legal and psychological support, orchestrated with such extraordinary swiftness and precision, immediately indicated a carefully considered, almost pre-planned response to a crisis, rather than merely a spontaneous reaction to overwhelming trauma. This case was going to be very complicated. The detective concluded with a knowing and somewhat weary sigh, a profound understatement given the dense layers of narrative and counter-narrative, allegations and rebuttals that would inevitably unfold as the investigation delved deeper into the intricate, troubled history of Ashley and Doug Benefield. The investigation from this point promised to be a labyrinthine journey into a tumultuous marriage, fraught with escalating claims of abuse that, if substantiated, would profoundly impact the perception of the shooting and the moral culpability of the shooter. Critical and deeply troubling allegations soon surfaced, shaping the initial lens through which investigators would view the domestic history. The most aggressive Doug had been with her was after she told him that she was pregnant, a detail that, if verifiably true, would be profoundly damning, suggesting a horrific escalation of control, menace, and potential violence at a moment when Ashley should have felt most vulnerable and protected. Such a claim painted Doug as a truly malevolent figure, someone whose alleged aggressions targeted not just Ashley, but the unborn child. However, even in these early stages, the unyielding, objective language of physical evidence began to speak, almost subtly offering discordant notes that clashed with the emerging narrative. But the crime scene raises questions about Ashley's story. An early and critical insight revealed. These initial forensic observations hinted at profound discrepancies that frequently arise when a highly emotional, subjective account collides with the impartial scrutiny of forensic science and the undeniable reality of physical facts. The trajectory of the fatal bullet indicated that he wasn't coming directly at her, a crucial preliminary finding that directly contradicted the archetypal, universally recognized posture of a direct, frontal, self-defense assault where the aggressor is advancing menacingly. This stark piece of evidence immediately casts a shadow of doubt over the complete veracity of any spontaneous self-defense claim and raised profound questions about the necessity of lethal force in that precise moment. The Manatee County Sheriff's deputies were now embarking upon a thorough, methodical investigation into the tragic shooting death of Doug Benefield, understanding with absolute clarity that the complete truth, obscured by layers of personal narratives and strategic silences, would likely be far more convoluted and psychologically intricate than initial appearances or immediate emotional claims suggested. Their paramount objective, following initial stabilization of the scene, was to obtain a comprehensive, coherent, and crucially, direct statement from Ashley Benefield regarding the precise circumstances of the shooting itself. Such a first-hand account from the involved party is often invaluable, indeed almost irreplaceable, in reconstructing the precise sequence of events leading to a fatal outcome. The deputies, acting within their legal mandate, made the request formal. I have a search warrant. Okay, and your attorney's here. I'm going to give it a copy to both of you so you guys can read it. An officer stated to Ashley and her assembled legal team, ensuring full transparency regarding the scope of their actions. However, despite the gravity of the situation and the critical need for her direct testimony, Ashley, acting under the immediate and unequivocal counsel of her experienced attorneys, chose a different path, a legally permissible but strategically impactful one. Law enforcement gave her the opportunity to make a statement, and she refused. This exercise of her Fifth Amendment right, while constitutionally protected and entirely her prerogative, nevertheless presented a significant and immediate obstacle to the investigators, denying them the direct, invaluable insight into her detailed version of the fatal confrontation. Her lawyers argued that Ashley was not in a good state of mind to give any kind of statement. She was very overwhelmed emotionally. While there was undoubtedly a profound truth to her being in a state of deep emotional distress, this immediate and sustained silence created a critical vacuum of information that other narratives, particularly the burgeoning theories of intentional manipulation, would inevitably rush to fill. Despite invoking her fundamental right to remain silent regarding the critical details of the shooting itself, Ashley did, to her credit, cooperate with other procedural aspects of the extensive investigation. Although she invokes her right to remain silent, Ashley cooperates with the rest of the investigation. This involves standard forensic processing typically administered to individuals involved in a violent crime. After they swabbed Ms. Benefield for DNA and took photographs, they released her to go home. These meticulous procedures were crucial for collecting any potential physical evidence, ensuring that all avenues of inquiry remained open for later forensic analysis. However, without Ashley's direct, detailed account, and critically, without any other direct witnesses to the terrifying incident, the investigative team found themselves facing a challenging, almost impossibly steep uphill battle in accurately reconstructing the narrative. Because Ashley didn't give a statement and there were no witnesses, law enforcement only could go based on what was found at the crime scene, Doug's body, and then what they could do through interviewing other people involved, a detective explained, laying bare the profound limitations and analytical difficulties imposed by the absence of a direct, primary narrative from the alleged perpetrator. The task, therefore, mutated from simply gathering information to one of meticulously piecing together a complex, potentially fragmented, and highly contentious puzzle from disparate, sometimes contradictory, fragments of information, both physical and testimonial. Propelled by the authority of their duly issued search warrant, detectives immediately shifted their meticulous attention to the residence Ashley shared with her mother, recognizing it as the nexus of the escalating domestic conflict and the presumptive scene of the shooting. Crime scene technicians, possessing a forensic precision born of extensive training, began their methodical, painstaking work of identifying and collecting even the most minute pieces of physical evidence. The crime scene technicians recover spent shells in the bedroom, an investigator reported, providing the initial, unequivocal evidence of gunshots being fired within the dwelling. Further analysis revealed a precise number of shots. There were 4 shots that were actually fired. This number, 4, suggested a greater level of intensity and, perhaps, an absence of the surgical precision often associated with purely reactive self-defense in a constrained, high-stress environment where 1 or 2 shots might typically suffice. The officers meticulously documented the physical layout and the contents of the room where Doug was found, creating a comprehensive snapshot of the immediate environment. There was a mattress, a hamper, and a backpack, the investigator enumerated. Within that backpack, a significant and potentially telling discovery was made. Law enforcement found that in that backpack there was a firearm. However, subsequent forensic analysis and the recovery of the actual murder weapon quickly clarified its role. We knew it wasn't a murder weapon because we had the murder weapon indicating that the initial firearm used in the shooting had already been secured. But the presence of another weapon in a casual storage spot was notable. But the discoveries of firearms continued, progressively painting an even more complex, indeed alarming, picture for the investigators. They also found another firearm in the pantry of the kitchen. The cumulative presence of multiple weapons, strategically, almost casually, placed within a home where a fatal shooting had just occurred, immediately raised profound suspicions among experienced law enforcement personnel. It was a red flag for law enforcement that this home was almost emptied, and yet there were 3 firearms, an investigator reflected, highlighting the striking incongruity between the apparent state of the house, suggesting an imminent move, or perhaps a sudden departure, and the concentrated presence of lethal weaponry. The general sparsity of the house's furnishings, coupled with its concentration of firearms, began to strongly suggest a pre-existing state of readiness, a preparedness, or perhaps even an expectation of a violent confrontation. The fact that there was nothing else in the house seemed to indicate that maybe they were expecting a problem, the investigator concluded, a chilling hypothesis that subtly but powerfully shifted the interpretative framework of the situation from one of purely reactive self-defense to one potentially tinged with premeditation or, at least, proactive preparation for conflict. Further diligent investigation revealed the clear chain of ownership for these weapons. One of the firearms belonged to Ashley's mother, and 2 of the firearms belonged to Ashley, directly linking Ashley to multiple potential weapons, adding to the growing complexity of her narrative. Perhaps one of the most crucial, indeed profoundly telling, pieces of objective forensic evidence emerged concerning the victim himself, directly challenging any narrative of him as an imminent armed threat. Doug was absolutely unarmed, the investigator emphasized with categorical certainty. He had no guns or weapons of any kind on his person. The meticulous search extended beyond mere visual inspection. It delved into his personal effects. He didn't even have his wallet with him. The mundane, everyday details of his attire further underscored his complete unpreparedness for a violent, potentially lethal confrontation. He's wearing his flip-flops like he always does. He's wearing a t-shirt. This image of Doug, casually dressed, without even a basic personal item like a wallet, and crucially, without any means of self-defense, stood in stark and undeniable contrast to the potential need for lethal force as described in a classic self-defense scenario. He doesn't have anything on him, nothing to defend himself, the investigator concluded, delivering a damning blow to any assertion that Doug represented an immediate, armed, mortal threat requiring Ashley's use of firearm. Other cascading aspects of the case, unfolding rapidly through witness interviews and background checks, only served to deepen the investigators' already considerable skepticism regarding the quickly coalescing narrative of pure self-defense. The almost instantaneous arrival of Dr. Barbara Russell, a therapist specifically specializing in domestic violence cases, particularly raised eyebrows within law enforcement circles. The fact that a therapist was on the scene within minutes is unheard of. A seasoned detective noted, underscoring the extraordinary and highly unusual timing. Dr. Russell, in her own statement to the authorities, elucidated the sequence of her unexpected presence, a detail that further reinforced the impression of a highly coordinated, rather than purely spontaneous, response. I received a phone call from Ashley's family law attorney. She asked me to please go over to the house to check on Ashley's mother. This direct, immediate link to Ashley's legal team, almost simultaneously with the shooting itself, firmly underscored the perception among investigators of a prepared, tactical legal response rather than an organic, crisis-driven act of compassion. Dr. Russell further expressed her own initial surprise upon arriving, which inadvertently lent an unintended but significant layer of credibility to the investigators. Growing suspicion regarding Ashley's initial narrative. She reiterated that her mom had thought that it was Ashley who had been killed. I was absolutely shocked to hear that Doug was the one who had been shot. This genuine surprise from an involved professional further highlighted the profound disjunct between initial appearances and the shocking reality. As investigators diligently pursued every lead, meticulously cross-referencing information, and systematically examining past police reports involving the couple, they began to uncover a pattern of behavior from Ashley that fundamentally and critically challenged her perceived credibility. Law enforcement started speaking to other law enforcement officers who had dealt with Ashley in the past, a standard and invaluable practice in complex, high-stakes investigations to ascertain a comprehensive historical profile of individuals involved. What they meticulously learned from these inquiries was profoundly telling and shifted their initial assessment. They learned that she was less credible than they initially thought she was. One particular police report, filed by Ashley in the year 2017, stood out as a stark and indeed audacious example of her alleged penchant for dramatic and improving accusations. In this alarming instance, she was convinced Doug was trying to kill her and the baby, an allegation of a truly malevolent and murderous intent, particularly chilling given her pregnant state. The specifics of her accusation were both theatrical and deeply unsettling. He sent her a birthday gift, which was tea, an investigator explained, outlining the mundane object at the heart of the dramatic claim. She claimed that it smelled funny when she opened the package, and she thought that it may have poison in it. The severity and inherent danger of such an allegation, implying an attempt at poisoning a pregnant woman, triggered an immediate and extensive emergency response from local authorities, diverting significant public resources and mobilizing specialized teams trained for high-risk situations. I contacted the bomb squad and hazmat team that came out to inspect the box and analyze it for what was inside. The responding officer from that past incident recounted, detailing the serious official reaction to Ashley's claims. The conclusive findings, after extensive and rigorous testing of the tea, were unequivocal and profoundly deflating for Ashley's narrative. Ultimately, they'd find that there was nothing malicious about this package of tea. The tea, conclusively, was simply tea. Ashley's reaction to this definitive scientific debunking of her sensational claim was highly illuminating and deeply concerning to the investigators. Ashley was not happy that law enforcement was not going to arrest Doug. Her discontent suggested not a relieved citizen, but frustrated manipulator. The meticulous re-examination of Ashley's startling tea poisoning allegations, viewed through the chilling new lens of a fatal shooting, forced investigators to consider a profoundly disquieting possibility. Their primary analytical question now morphed into whether Ashley's tea poisoning allegations were intended to serve a different purpose. Looking back at the totality of her behaviors, the pattern that began to emerge strongly suggested a deliberate and carefully calculated strategy of systemic fabrication and emotional weaponization, rather than genuine paranoia or legitimate fear. Looking back at everything, It seemed she was trying to show everybody that he was such a bad person, and that he would try to do this to her and the baby. An investigator perceptively speculated, beginning to formulate a coherent hypothesis of intentional, long-term manipulation. This specific incident, once dismissed as an unusual misunderstanding or severe overreaction, now appeared to be an early, audacious, and somewhat theatrical attempt by Ashley to establish a fabricated narrative, to create a public and institutional record of Doug as a dangerous, malevolent individual capable of even attempted murder. The detective directly involved in that earlier incident succinctly summarized his enduring impression, which had now proven chillingly prophetic. At the conclusion of the interview with her that day, I definitely was left with the impression of, there's something going on here on both sides of this. Maybe she's not being 100% truthful. This nascent doubt, first seeded years prior by Ashley's theatricality and unsubstantiated claims, had now blossomed into full-blown, justified suspicion, informing the entire trajectory of the murder investigation. As the narrative unfolded, revealing layers of marital discord and accusations, Doug's loved one stepped forward, eager to offer a vastly different perspective on his character and the circumstances surrounding his death. The contrast between their accounts and Ashley's allegations was stark, almost jarring. Coming up, Doug's loved ones cast further doubt on the circumstances of his death. These individuals, who had known Doug intimately for decades, painted a portrait of a man entirely at odds with the abusive figure Ashley described. Doug was being accused of things that were impossible, that he would never ever in a million years do, a family friend emphatically stated, his voice ringing with a profound sense of disbelief and offense at the emerging accusations. To them, Doug was not the controlling, violent aggressor, but rather a loving man that took care of other people. This consistent counter-narrative, offered by multiple, credible sources, created a powerful and undeniable dissonance with Ashley's claims, forcing investigators to question the veracity of her entire story. All information that I got was a very different picture than one that Ashley had painted. A detective observed, acknowledging the increasingly bifurcated understanding of Doug's fundamental character. According to those closest to Doug, the tables were turned. Ashley was not the victim she meticulously portrayed, but rather the problem herself, a source of conflict and manipulation. His older daughter, Eva, shared her profound insights with investigators, detailing how tensions within their household began almost immediately after Ashley had integrated herself into their lives. Eva vividly recalled Ashley's unsettling behaviors, describing an almost infantile emotional volatility. She said that Ashley would throw tantrums and seem jealous of Eva, painting a disconcerting picture of a household fraught with rivalry and emotional manipulation. The alleged jealousy, Eva recounted, extended beyond mere superficial competition, reaching into the fundamental, almost sacred bond between father and daughter. She didn't want Doug to choose Eva over her. This emotional manipulation, if substantiated, spoke to a deep-seated insecurity and a powerful, almost pathological, desire for exclusive affection and control over Doug's emotional landscape. Eva's deeply unsettling testimony, however, revealed far more disturbing and insidious patterns of behavior. She bravely confided in investigators that Ashley's relentless jealousy and possessiveness extended even to the revered memory of Eva's tragically deceased mother, Renee. Ashley came in, and she wanted to get rid of Renee. Eva recounted with a chilling sense of affront and bewilderment this profound desire to systematically erase Renee's presence from Doug's life and their shared home, manifested in concrete, deliberate actions that deeply distressed Eva. She didn't want Renee's pictures. She didn't want Renee's home decor. Such attempts to systematically expunge the cherished memory of a deceased wife and mother are, from a criminal psychology perspective, deeply troubling indicators of an intense proprietary claim over Doug, signaling a profound insecurity and an almost pathological drive to eliminate all perceived rivals. even those existing only in memory. Most shockingly, Eva reported to law enforcement an allegation so profoundly preposterous, so vile in its calumny, that it unveiled the potential depths of Ashley's perceived malice and manipulative genius. Ashley told her she needed to stay away from her father because her father had also killed her mother, this outrageous fabrication. Accusing Doug of fratricide and an almost unimaginable act against Renee was not an isolated incident. Instead, Ashley leveraged this horrifying lie to its extreme, attempting to initiate official action against Doug's past. Ashley also went as far as contacting law enforcement and trying to get Renee's body exhumed, because she was making allegations that Doug had also poisoned Renee. This extreme act of desperation, accusing Doug of poisoning his first wife, was particularly insidious given the unequivocal medical facts surrounding Renee's death. At the time, South Carolina police had confirmed with the coroner that Renee died of natural causes. Ashley's relentless persistence in advancing this demonstrably false accusation was deeply unsettling. She never stopped doing that on a regular basis. This consistent pattern of unfounded, sensational accusations profoundly troubled the seasoned investigators, serving as a powerful corroboration of their growing suspicions about Ashley's calculated deception and profound capacity for manipulation. Ashley consistently would accuse Doug of things that many times were not true and were unprovable, a detective summarize of the weary conviction, painting a portrait of a woman alarmingly adept at manufacturing elaborate and damaging narratives to serve her own ends. When detectives meticulously reviewed the extensive court filings pertaining to the tumultuous and protracted marital dissolution and the bitter subsequent custody disputes, they discovered a more nuanced and psychologically complex picture of the relationship's pathology. Intriguingly, some of Ashley's accusations, surprisingly, did possess a foundational basis in reality, offering momentary fragments of truth. However, these legitimate incidents had, in virtually every instance, been dramatically amplified to support her depiction of Doug. This critical distinction was profound. It revealed that Ashley was not necessarily fabricating everything from whole cloth. Instead, she was masterfully distorting, exaggerating, and weaponizing genuine moments of marital strife, instances of Doug's admitted poor judgment, to strategically bolster her overarching narrative of him as a relentlessly abusive and dangerous individual. It is clear that Doug did some things that would not be appropriate. An investigator conceded with professional objectivity, refusing to paint Doug as an entirely blameless figure. Doug himself, remarkably, had addressed some of these very behaviors directly and candidly in a sworn deposition, providing invaluable insight into his own regrettable actions. Doug, in a deposition, talked about some of these behaviors that she was accusing him of. One specific incident involved property damage, a display of uncontrolled anger. One of them was punching holes in the walls. He admitted he punched holes in the wall one time in South Carolina. Another disturbing revelation involved the discharge of firearm, a profoundly serious act even in a moment of emotional duress. He also talked about the shooting of the gun into the ceiling. He said he did that out of frustration. These were clear and unequivocal instances of poor judgment and moments where Doug allowed his emotions to catastrophically get the better of him. He made poor choices and let his emotions get the best of him. However, the investigators also emphasized a critical and morally profound distinction between these regrettable past actions and the ultimate act of lethal force. But those things not only were separated in time, but still don't warrant Ashley shooting and killing him years later. The acknowledged moments of Doug's aggression, while certainly inappropriate, deeply regrettable, and indicative of significant marital discord, did not, in the professional judgment of law enforcement and through the lens of legal justification, constitute a direct, immediate, and mortal threat that would rationally justify the premeditated, lethal use of force years later. especially under the very specific and forensically contradictory circumstances observed at the actual crime scene. The time elapsed and the circumstances made a crucial difference. The precise timing of Ashley's most sensational and ultimately discredited accusation, the alleged poisoning with tea, garnered particular and intense investigative interest as detectives sought to establish a chronological pattern of her manipulative behaviors. This significant incident occurred in the spring of 2018. Critically, just prior to this dramatic event, Doug had reached out to his legal team, signaling his proactive intent to engage constructively in the relationship's rapidly approaching new phase. Doug reached out to my law firm to set up an appointment to discuss options for reaching out to Ashley because he and Ashley were getting ready to have their baby. His attorney recounted, her words emphasizing Doug's desire for paternal involvement. This specific contextual detail was crucial. It indicated that Doug was actively attempting to establish a connection and claim his rightful involvement in the impending birth and the life of his unborn child. Ashley's reaction to this, viewed retrospectively, was immediate, dramatic, and strategically impactful. She went into Tampa General Hospital the very next day after she got my email. Once admitted to the hospital, her narrative was clear, alarming, and aimed squarely at isolating Doug from their child. Ashley tells the nurses she's been poisoned and that she wants to deliver her baby. This dramatic self-reporting, steeped in accusations against Doug, culminated in an expedited medical procedure. She ultimately ends up getting induced and then delivering her daughter. The subsequent actions Ashley took regarding her newborn daughter further solidified the investigative theory of a carefully orchestrated, systematic manipulation designed to assert absolute control. Ashley not only doesn't put a father down on the birth certificate, she also doesn't give their daughter Doug's name. These were not mere oversights born of oversight or postpartum confusion, but deliberate and highly consequential choices that fundamentally impacted Doug's legal and paternal rights, systematically attempting to erase his connection to their child. It became chillingly clear that Ashley used the alleged poisoning to keep Doug from seeing the child for 6 months until he took her to court. This protracted and unjustifiable denial of access to his own child forced Doug into an arduous legal battle to establish and defend his fundamental paternal rights. The judge presiding over the bitter custody dispute, after meticulously reviewing all presented evidence, including the investigative findings on the poison tea claim, rendered a critically significant judgment regarding Ashley's overall credibility. The judge, after hearing the evidence, said that there was no evidence that there was any poisoning and that Ashley was not a credible witness. This unequivocal judicial pronouncement, systematically casting severe doubt on Ashley's truthfulness in an official legal setting, represented a profound turning point in the family's prolonged disputes and, crucially, served as a highly incriminating piece of historical evidence for the subsequent murder investigation. This judicial determination directly counteracted Ashley's desperate efforts to maintain sole control, leading to a ruling that affirmed Doug's rights. And she ends up giving Doug visitation with his child. Ultimately, they had to figure out time sharing and work out co-parenting on the weekends. Over the ensuing 2 years, as Doug and Ashley were reluctantly compelled by court order to navigate the inherent complexities of co-parenting, often a challenging enough endeavor even under amicable circumstances, Ashley's pattern of escalating accusations became increasingly stark, desperate, and even audacious. Initially, she said he was doing abusive things to her, an investigator summarized, recalling the initial self-serving focus of her claims. And then, when that didn't work, she changed to abusive behaviors towards a child. This calculated and deeply disturbing shift in the target of her allegations, from herself to their shared daughter, represented a severe and morally reprehensible escalation. Such claims invariably trigger the most rigorous and immediate attention from law enforcement, a stark truth Ashley undoubtedly understood. Law enforcement takes domestics very serious, the detective emphasized. Claims of abuse against children, they investigate these cases to their fullest, deploying all available resources to verify or refute such grave charges. However, despite the intense scrutiny and comprehensive investigations triggered by these profoundly serious allegations, the diligent efforts of multiple agencies consistently yielded the same result. We found there was never any evidence that Doug did any crimes against a child. To the seasoned investigators, this consistent absence of any corroborating evidence for child abuse, particularly after such exhaustive inquiries, strongly suggested a profoundly disturbing and deeply manipulative motive behind Ashley's relentless campaign of accusation. To investigators, it suggests Ashley was willing to do anything to retain sole custody of their child. The detective concluded, his voice heavy with a grim realization of her unwavering intent. She was hell-bent and was willing to make almost any allegation she could to make that happen. The portrait emerging was not one of a terrified victim, but of a woman ruthlessly determined to eliminate all obstacles to her singular, absolute control over her daughter. This stark realization transformed the central investigative question from a mere search for truth into a profound, ethically charged, and deeply troubling psychological query. Was she fearing for her life, or was she executing a thorough plot to start her own life without Doug in the picture now? The meticulously documented, long-term pattern of false allegations, coupled with the critical absence of any immediate, demonstrable physical threat at the crime scene, began to coalesce, painting an increasingly sinister and highly incriminating picture. Detectives investigating Doug Benefield's tragic death now believe with growing conviction that Ashley Benefield might indeed be attempting to cover up a carefully constructed murder plot, a scheme that had been meticulously, albeit subconsciously or consciously, years in the making. Their suspicions were definitively affirmed and given a chilling specificity when they consulted with Doug's attorney, an individual intimately familiar with the protracted, bitter legal struggle for custody. The attorney delivered a critical, indeed devastating, piece of information, a bombshell that inextricably linked the shooting to a powerful, immediate, and utterly compelling motive, providing the final, grim piece of the puzzle. September 30th, just 3 days after the homicide occurs. There was a hearing scheduled with a family law judge to find out if Doug gets more custody of this child, the attorney revealed, her voice imbued with a tragic awareness of the causal chain now visibly connecting the shooting to this impending court date. They were going to go back before this judge, who seemingly did not believe anything Ashley said. This was the crucible, the impending legal confrontation, the precise judicial tipping point that Ashley, having systematically exhausted all other avenues of obstruction, defamation, and accusation, clearly feared above all else. This imminent hearing represented an undeniable, credible threat to her absolute, singular control over their daughter, a prospect she had fought tooth and nail, by any means necessary, to prevent for years on end. The timing of the shooting, therefore, ceased to be merely coincidental. It became devastatingly, horrifically incriminating. Ashley's inability to manipulate the courts any further, combined with the crushing burden of a looming judicial decision that would undoubtedly favor Doug, given the judge's established and vocal skepticism of her past claims, pushed her to a precipice from which she evidently saw no other escape. The phrase, "she didn't know what else to do," uttered by someone close to her and offered as a potential explanation for her actions, was viewed by seasoned prosecutors as less a genuine justification born of terror and more a desperate, self-serving rationalization for an ultimate, irreversible act of violence born of frustration and impending legal defeat. I think it just got to that point where she snapped, was the interpretation often presented. However, the prosecution would meticulously argue that a snap born profound legal frustration and impending loss of control differs fundamentally and morally from a snap born of immediate, terror-inducing self-preservation in the face of an unavoidable mortal threat. This critical distinction became the very fulcrum upon which the prosecution's case would hinge. When faced with complex legal battle involving self-defense claims versus a charge of homicide, particularly when there is only one direct account of the fatal events, the task of establishing truth becomes incredibly arduous. When there's only one side of the story, it makes it an incredibly tough job to argue self-defense versus homicide. A seasoned legal expert acknowledged, emphasizing the inherent evidentiary challenge. To overcome this critical narrative imbalance and to prove their case beyond a reasonable doubt, detectives instinctively understood the paramount necessity of hard evidence, the immutable facts that transcend subjective emotional testimony. They would need to construct an undeniable counter-narrative built on scientific rigor and forensic certainty. The most critical pieces of that hard, objective evidence emerged from a painstaking and rigorous forensic analysis of the crime scene and, crucially, from Doug Benefield's body itself. They took Doug's shirt from the crime scene and analyzed that shirt for any residue from a bullet or gunpowder, a meticulously critical step in ballistics and distance analysis. The findings from this forensic examination were starkly definitive and highly significant. There was no stippling found on either the clothing or the body of Doug Benefield. Stippling, for the uninitiated, is the unmistakable pattern of unburned or partially burned gunpowder particles, as well as soot, that impact the skin or clothing when a firearm is discharged at extremely close range, typically within an arm's length or slightly more. Its complete absence was not a minor detail. It was an irrefutable and profoundly powerful indicator of the minimum distance between the firearm and the victim at the moment of discharge, based on the compelling and conclusive lack of any stippling. The forensic experts were able to make a critical determination regarding the distance from which the shots were fired. They were able to determine that the firearm was potentially 6 feet away from his body. This finding alone dramatically, even catastrophically, undermined Ashley's anticipated self-defense narrative, which would almost invariably depict a desperate struggle at incredibly close quarters. If Doug were coming at Ashley, you would think they would be much closer than 6 feet. A detective reasoned with stark common sense, highlighting the vast and undeniable discrepancy between the physical evidence and the expected dynamics of a life-or-death struggle fought within arm's length, where proximity is inherently unavoidable. Further, unassailable forensic clarity was provided by Doug's autopsy report, which offered irrefutable information regarding the precise trajectory of the fatal bullet. The trajectory of the fatal bullet was from the right side of Doug's chest. An investigator announced, detailing precise path of destruction wrought by the projectile. This specific entry point, this particular angle of impact, carried profound and deeply damning implications for accurately interpreting the dynamics of the shooting. This likely indicated that he wasn't coming directly at her in the sense of an attack. The investigator posited, systematically dismantling the foundational premise of a self-defense claim where an aggressor is, advancing head-on. Instead, the angle of the bullet strongly suggested a different scenario, one far removed from a frontal assault. He was probably turning around. This scenario implied that Doug might have been in the process of attempting to disengage, to flee the confrontation, or simply had his back or side partially turned to Ashley at the precise, fatal moment of impact. This collection of unequivocal forensic details, both the lack of stippling and the precise bullet trajectory, converge unequivocally, put into question whether or not her use of lethal force was actually necessary in that moment. The silent, irrefutable language of the physical evidence, meticulously gathered and scientifically analyzed, spoke volumes, constructing a powerful, objective counter-narrative that stood in stark and unyielding opposition to Ashley's presumed claim of immediate and unavoidable self-defense. We would expect to see X, Y, and Z pieces of evidence to indicate that this was truly self-defense. a prosecutor later explained, referring to the common indicators of close-range struggle. And everything put together really says this doesn't significant, true, justified self-defense. With the formidable weight of the physical evidence overwhelmingly contradicting a close-range, direct self-defense scenario, and with the meticulously compiled psychological profile strongly suggesting a deeply rooted motive, directly connected to the impending, crucial custody battle and a long, troubling history of calculated manipulation, the intricate legal noose began to inexorably tighten around Ashley Benefield. On the 4th of November, in the year 2020, a mere 5 weeks after the fatal shooting that had shattered the tranquility of Lakewood Ranch, Ashley Benefield was formally arrested and subsequently charged with the grave offense of second-degree murder. The arrest ignited an immediate and intense firestorm of media attention, transcending local interest and quickly captivating national headlines. The story, a compelling and often sensational blend of youthful beauty, a background in professional ballet, and the stark reality of deadly domestic violence, quickly seized the public imagination with an almost irresistible force. The media, ever astute at assigning a memorable and catchy moniker, wasted little time in dubbing her the Black Swan, a poignant and evocative reference that simultaneously conjured images of her elegant past as a ballerina and, tragically, underscored the sinister and morally ambiguous undertones of her alleged heinous crime. She's a beautiful girl who was a ballerina and now is accused of a heinous crime, a legal analyst observed, articulating the very paradox that fueled public fascination. This high-profile notoriety and the evocative imagery it conjured inevitably does affect the case, creating a powerful and often emotionally charged public discourse that, for better or worse, could potentially sway perceptions and influence opinions even before the meticulously structured, formal trial proceedings had even commenced. In the fraught and tense days leading up to the long-anticipated trial, Ashley's steadfast loved ones, fiercely propelled by an unwavering belief in her innocence and a passionate desire to see justice, served as they perceived it, rallied to her defense with an almost extraordinary zeal and commitment. An impressive army of supporters marched outside the courthouse, their collective presence a palpable and undeniable demonstration of solidarity, conviction, and emotional support. They skillfully employed various means to amplify their message and broadcast their unwavering belief in Ashley's victimization, utilizing bullhorns out there chanting things like, "We stand with Ashley," and trying to raise awareness about what was going on. This concerted and highly visible public relations effort, meticulously designed and executed, sought to profoundly shape the public narrative, to ensure that Ashley was primarily seen as a deeply traumatized victim, not a cold-blooded villain, to be universally portrayed as a desperate woman driven to ultimate and unavoidable measures by an relentlessly abusive and dangerous estranged husband. The battle for public perception waged vigorously even before the courtroom doors officially opened. The formal trial itself commenced on the 23rd July in the year 2024, an event meticulously prepared for by both the formidable prosecution team and Ashley's equally determined defense attorneys, Ashley's legal representatives. Undoubtedly keenly aware of the significant public sympathy and narrative leverage their supporters had diligently cultivated outside the courtroom, deftly utilized those very grounds to their strategic advantage within the formal proceedings. The defense made it very clear this was a case of self-defense and that Ashley didn't have a choice but to shoot and kill Doug, a straightforward and uncompromising articulation of their core legal strategy. They presented Ashley's consistent statements to various individuals as genuine, unadulterated expressions of profound and inescapable fear. Ashley said on multiple occasions that she was afraid for her safety, that she was afraid for her life. The formidable challenge facing the prosecution was to systematically dismantle this carefully constructed narrative of terror and desperation without, in the process, appearing to unfairly demonize a woman who, on the surface and to many in the public eye, garner considerable empathy and understanding due to her perceived vulnerability and emotional distress. Our way to combat that is to try and show that we had a motive, the prosecutor explained, reiterating the powerful constellation of evidence gathered about the looming, crucial custody dispute. We had a history. We had a pattern of behavior on her part. The tactical and ethical challenge for the prosecution was nuanced and demanding. We were very concerned about alienating a jury or making them think we were picking on Ashley when, in fact, we're just trying to show that she's been telling tales. Their objective was not personal attack, but rigorous evidentiary truth. The climax of the week-long trial arrived with an entirely unexpected, indeed profoundly dramatic, twist that shifted the entire equilibrium of the proceedings. For months leading up to the trial, Ashley had steadfastly invoked her constitutional right to remain silent, resolutely refusing to provide a direct, detailed account of the fatal shooting. Now, in a strategic and profoundly risky move that fundamentally altered the trial's established trajectory and ratcheted up the dramatic tension, she unilaterally decided to testify in her own defense, to speak directly to the jury. Ashley is the only one who knows for certain what happened that night, and so far she's refused to talk, a legal observer had noted, articulating the collective anticipation and speculation surrounding her prolonged silence. But now, as she was solemnly called to the witness stand, a palpable hush descended upon the courtroom, and the entire dynamic of the trial completely shifted. A profound sense of gravity permeated the air, signaling the pivotal moment of her direct address. We all kind of knew, now it's going to get real, a lawyer intimately involved in the proceedings recounted, acknowledging the immense and undeniable significance of her decision to finally break her silence. For the very first time since she pulled the trigger on her estranged husband in September 2020, Ashley Benefield stood before the court and dramatically broke her profound 4-year silence. From the witness stand, her voice wavering with emotion, she embarked upon an elaborate, highly theatrical account, meticulously walking the jurors through her emotional version of what she claimed transpired on that fateful night. Ashley and her mother were in the process of moving. She began meticulously setting the scene, emphasizing the transitional period they were undergoing. She asserted that Doug insisted that he help with the packing, presenting his presence as an unwanted intrusion. Ashley's testimony then meticulously detailed what she claimed was a chilling and escalating sequence of aggression. She alleged that Doug relentlessly tried to force a reconciliation, an overture she consistently rebuffed with clear refusals. And he wouldn't take no for an answer, she asserted, vividly describing his perceived persistent, unwanted advances and escalating pressure. The situation, in her recounting, catastrophically spiraled into a physical confrontation. He wouldn't let me leave. I tried to leave. He stopped me. He was standing in the doorway, she claimed, depicting a scenario of physical confinement and intimidation. The alleged verbal threats intensified, she claimed, painting a picture of dire warning. He said, "You're F done." Ashley then recounted what she termed a direct physical assault. Ashley says that Doug hit her in the face. This, in her narrative, was a catalyst that propelled her into desperate flight. This is when Ashley ran to her bedroom. According to her harrowing account, Doug continued his relentless, terrifying pursuit, forcing the ultimate confrontation. At that point, when Doug crashes through the bedroom door, what alternative is Ashley Benefield left with? In her narrative, sheer terror and the primal instinct of self-preservation overtook her. She grabs a gun in an effort to defend herself. She explicitly claimed to have issued clear, verbal warnings to her advancing husband. She says that she started pointing the gun at Doug and told him to stop moving towards her. And when he demonstrably, she claimed, didn't listen to those commands, in that moment of ultimate desperation, she says that's when she pulled the trigger. During the rigorous, often emotionally charged cross-examination, prosecutors, fully prepared for her theatrical performance, systematically and incisively challenged the granular details and emotional veracity of Ashley's highly dramatized story. They meticulously picked apart the alleged inconsistencies and the obvious emotional performance aspects of her testimony, seeking to expose any fabrication, exaggeration, or inconsistency with the objective evidence. "You say he slapped you?" The prosecutor probed with calculated precision, aiming to clarify the exact nature of the alleged physical contact, recognizing that a slap versus a hit could have different implications in a self-defense claim. Ashley, visibly uncomfortable and struggling under the intense scrutiny, equivocated. "I wouldn't know how to classify it. He struck me. He hit me." The prosecutor, clearly unconvinced by her vague and emotionally laden response, pressed further, making a direct and challenging request for a physical demonstration that directly contrasted her verbal account against the irrefutable forensic evidence found at the scene. Okay, so he's standing there. He turns like this and starts moving his arms around. Well, show me. What was he doing? This pointed request for a physical recreation of the alleged attack starkly highlighted the prosecutor's perception that her story, while emotionally delivered, crucially lacked the critical, tangible details and physical plausibility that would typically accompany a genuine, close-quarters self-defense scenario. The prosecution's perspective on Ashley's performance on the witness stand was, in summation, quite scathing and analytically precise. It was very clear to us that Ashley's testimony on the stand was performance, not truth. A prosecutor later stated, effectively pulling back the curtain on what they perceived as the trial's most dramatic and carefully orchestrated moment. They keenly observed and later articulated the outward manifestations of her emotional display, while simultaneously perceiving a profound and disturbing absence of genuine, visceral feeling beneath the theatrical surface. She would go through the motions of wailing and, convulsing and crying, but I never saw it here, the prosecutor revealed, a blunt and unsparing assessment of the authenticity of her grief or terror, a primary and critical goal of the meticulous cross-examination, and indeed the overarching prosecutorial strategy throughout the entire trial, was to ensure that the discerning jury saw through this perceived act, that they grasped the calculated nature of her performance. One of my goals was to get the jury to see that. In his powerful and meticulously constructed closing argument, the prosecutor painstakingly summarized the totality of Ashley's alleged deceptions, manipulations, and strategic fabrications. During my closing, I talked a lot about Ashley's manipulation, that she attempted to manipulate Doug. She attempted to manipulate law enforcement. She attempted to manipulate the courts. It was a devastating summation that sought to brand her not as a traumatized, fearful victim driven to extremes, but as a cunning, calculating strategist whose manipulative actions had tragically culminated in lethal violence. After a grueling, week-long trial that presented the jury with a labyrinthine maze of conflicting personal narratives, incontrovertible forensic evidence, and sophisticated psychological interpretations of behavior, the jury finally retired to deliberate, carrying the immense and solemn weight of determining the truth and, consequently, the ultimate fate of Ashley Benefield in their collective hands. In those tense and protracted moments of judicial limbo, an palpable sense of apprehension settled over the courtroom, with both the prosecution and defense feeling the profound gravity of their arduous work and the monumental stakes involved. In those moments, you feel the weight of your work. A legal participant reflected with profound introspection. You can't help but think, did I do enough? Did we give enough information to this jury? The future of Ashley Benefield, and tragically, the lasting legacy of Doug Benefield, hung precariously in the excruciating silence of deliberation. 6 arduous hours later, the jury, their faces etched with the solemn responsibility of their decision, returned to the courtroom to deliver their highly anticipated verdict. The verdict returned by the jury was a finding of guilty of manslaughter, the specific outcome. falling significantly short of the second-degree murder charge meticulously sought by the determined prosecution, but also unequivocally exceeding an outright acquittal based solely on a claim of self-defense, was a nuanced and complex finding. It strongly suggested that the jury had wrestled deeply, agonizingly, and at length with the profound complexities and inherent ambiguities of the case. The jury coming back with manslaughter, I believe, is an attempt to give some recognition that this was a very difficult case. A legal analyst opined, interpreting the verdict not as a definitive triumph for either side, but rather as a careful and considered balancing act, a precise reflection of the deeply conflicting evidence presented and the emotionally charged testimony that had permeated the trial. For the intricate legal system, and perhaps for the collective conscience of the community grappling with this tragedy, the verdict was presented as an imperfect, yet ultimately pragmatic, pathway to a final resolution. And I think it was probably the best result to come to justice in the end. Ashley Benefield was subsequently sentenced to 20 years in prison, a severe and profoundly life-altering consequence that underscored the undeniable seriousness of the crime, even if it was not ultimately categorized as premeditated, calculated murder. In the poignant and often emotionally charged press conference held in the aftermath of the trial, outside the solemn confines of the courthouse, Doug's grieving loved ones addressed their complex, often contradictory feelings about the case's conclusion. They expressed a profound measure of relief, yet it was a relief inextricably tempered with an enduring, raw sense of loss and grief. We're thankful that the lesser charge was allowed. We knew we could achieve that. For them, a significant, indeed paramount, victory lay not just in the legal outcome, but more profoundly in the public vindication of Doug's deeply respected character. We proved that Doug Benefield was not in the condition or the person they tried to make him out to be. The insidious and persistent accusations of systemic abuse, of Doug being a predatory, dangerous figure, had been officially refuted by the judicial process, if not entirely erased from a more ephemeral public consciousness. Yet, in a remarkable display of profound humanity and empathy amidst their own overwhelming sorrow, their compassion extended even to Ashley. We know this was traumatic for her also. This acknowledging statement, made in the very crucible of their immense loss, spoke volumes about their own resilient character and their capacity for understanding. Ultimately, they recognized the truly tragic, all-encompassing nature of the entire, devastating event. No one wins in this case. The collateral damage wrought by such a profoundly tragic case, particularly one involving the parents of a young child, invariably and disproportionately falls upon the innocent. The outcome in this case has a significant impact on her daughter because now she's without both of her parents, a stark and heartbreaking reminder of the long, dark shadow cast by acts of violence, leaving an innocent life orphaned by a profound and irreversible choice. Doug Benefield, a man of unwavering faith, distinguished military service, and formidable entrepreneurial spirit, was, for his family, utterly irreplaceable. There's no replacing Doug Benefield, no one with his creativity, no one with his innovation. His sudden, violent absence left an irreparable and aching void, particularly for his beloved daughter, Eva, who had already endured the loss of her mother. It's crushing not to have him around for Eva, for our entire family. The compelling and ultimately tragic case of Ashley Benefield, the haunting figure famously dubbed the Black Swan of Lakewood Ranch, Florida, stands as an indelible and chilling testament to the profound complexities of human relationships and the devastating, far-reaching consequences that can arise when manipulation, control, and unchecked ambition tragically eclipse reason, compassion, and the sanctity of life. It starkly underscores the vital, indeed indispensable, role of meticulous investigative work, where the cold, unyielding facts gleaned from forensic science speak volumes, often far louder and with greater authority than emotionally charged or self-serving narratives. The judicial outcome, a finding of guilty of manslaughter, profoundly reflects a jury's arduous attempt to reconcile the seemingly irreconcilable, a long and troubled history of emotional strife, ambiguous past acts of aggression, and ultimately a lethal choice made at a critical, fateful juncture that ended a human life. While justice, in its legal interpretation and the formal application of law, was ultimately rendered, the broader humanistic lesson, etched into the collective memory, is far more profound and enduring, that hidden fears, insidious plots, and the corrosive forces of desperation can tragically permeate and irrevocably shatter even the most seemingly idyllic and secure settings, reminding us all that true safety and societal harmony come not solely from robust security gates or well-manicured facades, but ultimately from the unwavering pursuit of truth, the tenacious upholding of justice, and a deep, compassionate understanding of the inherent vulnerabilities and volatile impulses that define and challenge us all as human beings. It is a story that, for generations to come, will undoubtedly continue to echo through the quiet, tree-lined streets of Lakewood Ranch, a poignant and stark reminder that beneath the polished veneer of societal perfection, the most terrifying and emotionally devastating dramas of all sometimes play out irrevocably in the most intimate and personal of human spaces. And through it all, the efforts of the dedicated investigators, forensic specialists, and legal professionals illuminate the enduring spirit of justice, a beacon shining brightly even in the darkest corners of human experience, inspiring the timeless triumph of good over evil, however subtle its manifestation. The narrative rhythm of life, as revealed by this tragic saga, reminds us to remain vigilant, to observe keenly, and to always strive for empathy and truth. For the security of a community rests as much on these intangibles as on any physical barrier. This account serves as a cautionary tale, urging us to recognize the signs, to seek help where possible, and to champion the rigorous processes of law enforcement and justice that, even in profound sorrow, provide a measure of peace and accountability. The black swan may have flown, but the lessons of its tragic journey remain indelible for all who are willing to see and to understand. The path to enlightenment and justice is often arduous, but the steadfast determination to unravel complex truths offers a fundamental humanistic meaning, inspiring awareness and, ultimately, hope. It's a somber tale, yes, but one that reaffirms the human capacity to seek, understand, and apply the principles of fairness, ensuring that the efforts of all involved are justly honored, and that victims like Doug find their truth even after life has ceased. This story serves as an enduring reminder that empathy and justice are twin pillars upon which any truly secure society must be built. The tranquil, meticulously planned communities of Lakewood Ranch, Florida, an enclave justly renowned for its pristine safety records and a palpable sense of serene, almost unblemished, tranquility, were brutally and irrevocably shattered on the 27th of September in the year 2020, as the early evening skies, normally a canvas of soft hues, yielded to the encroaching shadows of twilight, a domestic disturbance, tragically amplified by the ultimate act of lethal violence, punctured the otherwise placid facade of this upscale suburban haven. It was a stark and profoundly somber reminder that no security gate, however ornate or rigorously maintained, can entirely shield individuals from the intricate, often volatile, and deeply hidden conflicts that can fester and rage within the human heart. The incident demonstrated with chilling clarity that even in bastions of perceived security, residents are not immune to the profoundly devastating impact of internecine strife. A tragic human drama that played out behind closed doors, but reverberated throughout the community. At precisely 7 o'clock in the evening, a seismic shockwave, composed of raw alarm and disbelief, ripped through the local law enforcement's dispatch center. A frantic 911 call, originating from the trembling voice of an older gentleman, carried an urgent, almost incredulous, plea for immediate assistance. His neighbor, he recounted, had just appeared at his doorstep, delivering a declaration that transcended mere domestic dispute and ventured into chilling, irreversible territory of grievous bodily harm, or even worse. The caller, his voice a tapestry woven with disbelief and mounting anxiety, struggled to articulate the full horror of what had just transpired. His neighbor has just come to his house, and that she had shot her husband. This statement, stark and bald in its shocking brevity, instantly set in motion a rapid and urgent deployment of Manatee County Sheriff's deputies, transforming a peaceful residential evening into a scene of chaotic uncertainty and potential peril, raising the community's collective heartbeat with a sudden, dreadful jolt. The woman who had sought refuge and, ostensibly, urgent help at his door was in a profoundly agitated state, verging on the hysterical. The caller accurately described her as quite hysterical, a descriptor that conveyed a disoriented distress, a palpable emotional unraveling in the immediate, raw aftermath of a catastrophic event. Her words, though fragmented and tumbling out in a torrent of raw emotion due to her state of hysteria, carried a stark accusation and, crucially, an immediate and undeniable admission of her direct involvement in the violence. She said that he attacked her and she shot him, the neighbor relayed, capturing the essence of her desperate and fragmented confession. The identity of this distressed woman was quickly established. 28-year-old Ashley Benefield. Her estranged husband, 58-year-old Doug Benefield, was identified as the victim, a detail that immediately colored the incident with the familiar, ominous tones of a domestic altercation that had tragically escalated beyond the point of no return, moving from heated words to lethal force in a terrifying instant. The estranged nature of their marital relationship was a pivotal detail, one that immediately painted a picture of prolonged, simmering conflict rather than a sudden, unpredictable explosion of rage from a momentary argument. Doug and Ashley were not living together, the caller confirmed, adding the crucial information that this separation was not a recent development, but a long-standing state of affairs. They had not been living together for about 3 years, he elaborated. The significant temporal gap, a period of considerable duration and presumably marked by increasing friction, strongly suggested that the shooting was not an isolated incident born of immediate proximity or an overnight flare-up. Instead, it bore the grim hallmark of a catastrophic culmination of a protracted, evidently bitter, and deeply entrenched marital dissolution, where underlying tensions had been simmering dangerously beneath the surface for far too long, adding to the immediate tension and profound uncertainty that permeated the scene. Ashley's profoundly disoriented and hysterical state of mind rendered her incapable of providing critical information regarding the victim's immediate medical condition. She did not know if he was alive or dead, the neighbor disclosed, highlighting the agonizing medical ambiguity that surrounded Doug Benefield's fate, compounding the shock with agonizing uncertainty. This uncertainty naturally instilled a profound and growing fear in the elderly caller, who harbored a deeply unsettling and rational thought. The neighbor was very concerned that he might be coming to the door next. The chilling specter of an injured, possibly enraged, and potentially armed individual now free to roam further complicated the dynamic, raising immediate and grave questions about the immediate safety of surrounding community. Furthermore, a paramount and immediate concern for the rapidly deploying first responders was the precise location of the weapon used in the shooting. Where's the gun? Is it with her? An unarmed shooter, however distraught, represented a significantly lower immediate threat profile, allowing for a more controlled approach to the chaotic scene, as if the scene were not already sufficiently fraught with tension and peril. The looming arrival of Ashley's family added another unforeseen layer of urgent complexity to the unfolding drama. Ashley's family is due to return at any moment, the caller stressed to the dispatcher, underscoring the ticking clock. Ashley, at the time of the shooting, was residing with her mother and her own young daughter. in a tragically mundane counterpoint to the impending crisis. Illustrating the profound normalcy that had been so abruptly shattered, Ashley's mom decided to just take her to the park. That was typical for them. They went to the park. Every night in the summer, this poignant detail, describing an innocent, almost ritualistic evening activity between a grandmother and granddaughter, underscored the profound and abrupt rupture of normalcy, setting a stark and almost unbearable contrast between familial serenity and the violent disruption that now engulfed their home. The shift from routine enjoyment to catastrophic trauma was brutally immediate and jarring for those involved. Sheriff's deputies, acutely aware of the rapidly ticking clock and the immense potential for a volatile and dangerous situation, responded with profound sense of urgency, moving with all deliberate speed and tactical precision to the scene. Deputies are running as fast as they can, okay? Was the terse, functional directive that permeated the airwaves, signaling the high priority and immediate action required by the nature of the call. As the neighbor remained on the phone with the dispatcher, receiving real-time, calm, and authoritative instructions, vital safety protocols were relayed regarding Ashley's imminent emergence from a neighbor's house. Dispatchers, strategically seeking to de-escalate any potential armed confrontation and ensure the safety of all involved parties, officers, neighbors, and Ashley herself, instructed the caller to tell her to have her hands up and just to walk out toward the deputies. This precise and universally recognized directive, a standard operating procedure in situations involving a potentially armed and agitated individual, aimed to prevent further tragedy and streamline the initial, critical interaction between law enforcement and the person directly involved in the potentially lethal shooting, prioritizing control and safety. Upon her eventual cautious emergence from the neighbor's house, Ashley's demeanor profoundly impressed the responding deputies. She was absolutely very much in a state of shock, a veteran deputy would later attest, recognizing the unmistakable hallmarks of acute trauma and psychological disarray. The human mind, when confronted with sudden, overwhelming violence and the profound aftermath of taking a human life, often enters a state of dissociative disarray, a psychological defense mechanism against unbearable reality. It's a lot of information for the mind to process, the deputy added, a testament to the cognitive overload Ashley was likely experiencing, a brain struggling to grapple with an unbearable reality. This immediate emotional incapacitation, a profound and undeniable form of psychological paralysis, rendered Ashley incapable of articulating a coherent sequence of events or the precise, agonizing genesis of the shooting itself. Her narrative, if any at all emerged, was fragmented, largely incoherent, and ultimately unhelpful in clarifying the immediate circumstances for the rapidly gathering officers, recognizing her state and, crucially, prioritizing the immediate need to secure the scene and attend to the critically injured victim. Deputies gently but firmly escorted Ashley into the back of a patrol car. This served not only to contain a central figure in a violent crime, but also to provide a measure of isolated and contained space where she could begin the monumental task of processing the catastrophic events, away from the immediate chaos and heightened tension of the unfolding crime scene investigation. With Ashley temporarily removed and contained within a patrol car, the deputies, now acutely aware of the gravity of the situation and the critical need to assess the victim's status, carefully and cautiously entered the residence Ashley shared with her mother, recognizing it as a presumptive location of the violent incident. Their immediate mission was unequivocal: locate Doug Benefield and render assistance. The search led them to the back bedroom, where they made the grim discovery. Doug Benefield lay there, his condition perilous. He is semi-conscious, a deputy noted, a fleeting ray of fragile hope amidst the unfolding tragedy, signaling that life still tenuously clung to him, however faintly. The responding deputies meticulously observed his visible injuries, cataloging the brutal and undeniable indicators of the violence that had just transpired. They observed that he had one wound to his right leg and one wound to his upper right chest area. The sight of these injuries, particularly the wound to the upper torso, immediately signaled the extreme danger Doug was in, a direct threat to his life. Acting with the rapid professionalism and ingrained training inherent in emergency responders, the deputies initiated immediate life-saving measures. They cut his shirt off, a somber investigator would later recount, describing the frantic, desperate attempts to access the wounds and administer crucial aid. They tried to perform CPR and tried to resuscitate him. Despite their diligent, desperate efforts to snatch life from the jaws of impending death, despite every ounce of their professional determination, the wounds proved too severe, the damage to vital organs too profound. But he died before he was able to arrive at the hospital, the investigator concluded, the stark finality of the statement reverberating with the irreversible tragedy that had unfolded in that quiet suburban bedroom. The collective, fragile hope for his survival, held so briefly, was extinguished forever, leaving behind only the cold reality of death. In the tumultuous and often chaotic immediate aftermath of such an incident, law enforcement's initial working theory often hinges on the most common understanding of such tragic occurrences. Law enforcement thought that it was a domestic dispute that had gotten out of hand and ended up with Doug being shot and killed. A police spokesperson later affirmed, succinctly capturing the initial, straightforward interpretation of events. In this particular instance, the identity of the shooter was not in question. It had been admitted. There was not a question of, as they say, who did it. Ashley herself had verbally admitted her involvement to the neighbor, however hysterically, leaving little doubt as to the perpetrator. Therefore, the investigative focus immediately pivoted, shifting from the rudimentary task of perpetrator identification to the far more intricate, psychologically charged, and ultimately central question of motivation and causation. It was more of a question of why did it happen. This overarching inquiry, laden with profound psychological complexities and intricate interpersonal dynamics, formed the new bedrock of the rapidly unfolding investigation. What was going on between Ashley and Doug? This foundational and deeply humanistic question will propel an exhaustive, meticulous inquiry, forcing detectives to peel back numerous layers of deeply personal history, delve into terrifying allegations of abuse, uncover shocking betrayals, and ultimately expose deeply entrenched deceptions that would fundamentally redefine the community's and the court's understanding of the tragic event that had occurred in Lakewood Ranch. To comprehend the full contours of this profound human tragedy, and to fully grasp the why behind the fatal shot, it became absolutely imperative to delve deeply into the life of Doug Benefield, the man whose existence had been so abruptly and violently extinguished. Doug Benefield was born on the 2nd of October, in the year 1961. His early years were shaped by the disciplined yet intellectually enriching environment of a military family, rooted deeply in Huntsville, Alabama, a city celebrated as a crucible of American innovation and scientific ambition, particularly during the heady, exciting days of the nation's space race. His father played a crucial, behind-the-scenes role in this epic-making endeavor, working for NASA, the space center there, on project development. This background, steeped in precision, ambitious undertakings, and a strong sense of national service, likely instilled in young Doug a foundational appreciation for hard work, intellectual rigor, and unwavering commitment to a larger purpose. His mother, Suzanne, embodied the enduring strength and quiet dedication of a stay-at-home parent, fostering a nurturing and stable environment within their household. The emotional anchor of the family unit, a profound and unyielding constant in Doug's early life, one that would significantly sculpt his moral and spiritual landscape, was the family's deep-seated religious faith. Doug's parents were at church most every Sunday. An individual familiar with his upbringing recalled, underscoring the regularity, importance, and foundational impact of the spiritual practice. And that really made an imprint for his whole life. This early and deeply immersive exposure to Christian tenets, emphasizing community, service, ethical conduct, and personal responsibility, would remain an indelible, guiding force throughout his existence, providing solace in times of personal struggle and grounding his ambitious endeavors. Doug diligently completed his high school education in Huntsville before embarking on his journey into higher academic pursuits at Texas A&M University, a respected institution known for its strong values. His initial career aspirations were both noble and intellectually demanding, unequivocally aligning with a deep-seated desire to contribute meaningfully to society and to help others. And his intention after Texas A&M was to go off to medical school, a close confidant revealed, painting a vivid picture of a young man driven by intellectual curiosity and a nascent passion for healing and scientific application. However, as life often dictates with its unforeseen turns and unpredictable pathways, circumstances intervened, subtly but decisively redirecting his trajectory onto an equally distinguished, albeit distinctly different, professional path. The esteemed United States Navy extended an enticing offer, promising to finance Doug's entire medical school education in exchange for military service. A classic quid pro quo of national service. But upon enlisting, the profound allure of naval life, specifically the demanding and exhilarating world of military aviation, proved to be an irresistible call, fundamentally altering his professional destiny. His career path took a different turn, a former colleague elaborated, sketching the pivotal moment of change, instead of the meticulous precision of a surgical theater. Doug found himself immersed in the thunderous roar of jet engines and the strategic complexities of aerial warfare. He ends up operating off aircraft carriers as a naval flight officer during Desert Storm and making 2 deployments, a powerful testament to his innate courage, adaptability, and unwavering dedication to his country's service. The demanding environment of an aircraft carrier, the high-stakes decisions made in moments of profound pressure, and the camaraderie forged in the crucible of military service, undoubtedly honed in Doug a formidable resilience, a keen resourcefulness, and a strong leadership capability that would serve him admirably in his subsequent civilian pursuits. Upon his distinguished retirement from active military service, Doug, ever the pragmatist and possessing a keen understanding of leveraging advantageous connections forged throughout his life, transitioned seamlessly and strategically into the dynamic world of entrepreneurship. In 1999, Doug retires from active service, stays in the Navy Reserves, a shrewd decision that allowed him to maintain a cherished link to his military heritage while simultaneously embarking on a new, ambitious professional chapter. He adeptly utilized his extensive family connections, a network cultivated through generations of civic engagement and public service, to expertly navigate this new business terrain. His sharp business acumen quickly identified a burgeoning economic opportunity in a culturally significant region poised for revitalization. He's gotten introduced to all the things going on with the renovations and the restoration of downtown Charleston, a city renowned for its historical gravitas and a vibrant economic resurgence. Capitalizing on this insight and fueled by an innate entrepreneurial spirit and a knack for identifying untapped potential, Doug made a bold venture. So he decided to open a restaurant, and it was fabulously successful. This endeavor transcended mere financial success. It provided Doug with a renewed sense of purpose, deeply integrating him into the vibrant fabric of the community he had chosen as his home, fostering both profound professional satisfaction and personal fulfillment. It was a testament to his versatility and capacity for success in diverse fields. Despite his undeniable professional successes and burgeoning financial stability, a subtle yet profound void persisted in Doug's personal life, a deep, persistent longing for something more. A crucial, Perhaps the most fundamental piece of his personal mosaic remained conspicuously absent.